Dust motes danced lazily in the weak rays of sunlight that pierced the gloom of the old mansion, swirling in the still air like tiny ghosts. The beams of light filtered through cracked, grimy windows, illuminating the faded grandeur of a place long forgotten by time. Every corner seemed to hold a secret, every shadow a memory waiting to be uncovered. Mac ran a hand along the cold, damp wall, feeling the roughness of cracked plaster beneath his fingertips. His footsteps echoed in the oppressive silence, each step a reminder of how empty and vast the mansion truly was. The chill from the stone seemed to seep into his bones, and the silence pressed in on him, broken only by the distant creak of settling wood. The air hung heavy, thick with the smell of decay and forgotten memories. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, revealing glimpses of a more opulent past. He had bought the house for a pittance, lured by its faded grandeur and a strange sense of peace it seemed to offer. The promise of restoration, of breathing new life into these old halls, had seemed almost romantic at first. Now, he wasn't so sure. Each room he explored felt like a whisper of the past, a story untold. The silence was thick, almost tangible, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone to disturb its slumber. Shadows clung to the corners, and the soft light only seemed to deepen the sense of mystery. He pushed open a set of double doors, the hinges groaning in protest, their sound echoing down the empty corridors. The library, once a place of knowledge and comfort, now stood shrouded in shadows. Dust coated every surface, and the air was thick with the scent of old paper and neglect. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their leather spines cracked and brittle with age. Some titles were still barely legible, while others had faded into obscurity. The scent of mildew hung heavy in the air, a musty perfume of neglect and time. It was as if the stories within these books had been waiting, untouched, for someone to remember them. It was here, in this room, that Mac felt the first prickle of unease, a subtle but unmistakable feeling that he wasn't alone. He ran his fingers along the spines of the books, their titles lost to time and dust, and felt a shiver run up his arm. The silence in the library was different, deeper, more watchful. It was as if the room itself was aware of his presence, observing him from the shadows. A faint scratching sound made him pause, his heart pounding in his chest. He turned, expecting to see a rat or a bird, startled by his presence. The sound was soft, almost hesitant, as if whatever made it was unsure whether to reveal itself. Mac held his breath, straining to listen, but the noise faded as quickly as it had come. But the room was empty. The only movement was the dust swirling in the shafts of light. He continued his exploration, his hand trailing along the shelf, feeling the unevenness of the wood and the occasional bump of a forgotten trinket. The sense of being watched lingered, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Suddenly, a section of the bookcase shifted slightly under his touch. Curiosity piqued. He pressed his palm against the wood, feeling it give way. With a grinding groan, the entire bookcase swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow opening behind it. The passage was cloaked in shadow, the air colder and heavier than the rest of the house. Mac hesitated, peering into the darkness, his imagination running wild with possibilities. What secrets had the mansion kept hidden all these years? With a deep breath, he stepped forward, drawn by the promise of discovery and the thrill of the unknown. The air in the hidden room was stale, thick with the scent of dust and decay. Every breath Mac took seemed to stir up ancient particles, swirling in the faint light, as if the room itself was exhaling secrets long kept from the world. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint creak of the floorboards beneath his feet, and the distant echo of his own heartbeat. A single red-tinted bulb hung from the ceiling, its weak glow barely illuminating the corners of the room. The light flickered occasionally, casting long, grotesque shadows across the floor and walls, distorting the shapes of the furniture and making the room feel even more otherworldly. The bulb's crimson hue gave everything a surreal, almost nightmarish quality, as if Mac had stepped into a place where time itself had warped. Rows upon rows of shelves lined the walls, stacked high with what seemed like hundreds, maybe thousands of framed photographs. The shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, each one sagging slightly under the weight of so many memories. Some frames were ornate, gilded with intricate designs, while others were plain and utilitarian, but all were coated in a thick layer of dust untouched for years. Max stepped inside, his footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that covered the floor. Each step left a clear imprint, marking his path through the forgotten archive. The dust clung to his shoes and rose in tiny clouds with every movement, making the air even heavier and more oppressive. The photographs were all different sizes and styles, some faded with age, their images barely visible, while others were surprisingly clear, as if they had been taken only yesterday. Some were sepia-toned, others black and white, and a few in muted color, each capturing a moment frozen in time. The variety was staggering: weddings, family gatherings, solitary portraits, and candid shots of everyday life. But they all had one thing in common: faces. Faces of men, women, and children, their eyes staring out from the frames with an unsettling intensity. Some smiled, some looked solemn, and a few seemed to glare with suspicion or fear. No matter where Mac moved, he felt the weight of their gazes following him, as if the people in the photographs were silently judging his presence in their sanctuary. Mac felt a shiver run down his spine. Who were these people? And why were their portraits hidden away in this forgotten room? The questions echoed in his mind, growing louder with every step he took. The atmosphere was thick with mystery, and Mac couldn't shake the feeling that he was trespassing on something sacred, or perhaps even cursed. He reached out and picked up a photo at random. It was a young woman, her hair piled high on her head in an elaborate style, dressed in clothing from another era. The photograph was surprisingly well preserved, the details of her dress and jewelry still sharp despite the passage of time. Mac wondered who she was, what her life had been like, and why her image had ended up here, among so many others. Her eyes, a piercing blue, seemed to follow his every move. There was something almost alive in her gaze, a spark of personality that transcended the decades. Mac felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if he knew this woman, though he couldn't place her. The sensation was both comforting and deeply unsettling, as if some forgotten memory was trying to claw its way to the surface. He quickly put the photo back, a sense of unease settling over him. The room felt colder now, the shadows deeper, and Mac couldn't shake the feeling that he had disturbed something that should have been left alone. He wiped his hands on his pants, trying to rid himself of the chill that had crept into his bones. As he explored further, he noticed that the photos weren't arranged randomly. They seemed to be in some kind of order, grouped by family or perhaps by generation. Some shelves held only children, others were filled with stern-faced patriarchs and matriarchs, and a few displayed entire families, their faces frozen in time together. It was as if the room was a map of forgotten lives, each photograph a marker on a vast, invisible family tree. He found himself drawn deeper into the archive, compelled to uncover the stories behind the faces that stared back at him. Every step took him further from the world he knew, and deeper into the mysteries of the past. The silence pressed in around him, broken only by the soft whisper of his own breath, and the distant imagined echoes of voices long gone. Mac knew he should leave, but something in the room, some unspoken promise of revelation, kept him moving forward, deeper into the heart of the archive, where the secrets of generations waited to be discovered. Days turned into weeks, and Mac found himself drawn back to the archive again and again. Each visit felt less like a conscious decision and more like a compulsion, as if some invisible thread was pulling him through the mansion's creaking halls. The air in the archive was always thick with dust and secrets, the silence broken only by the soft echo of his footsteps and the distant creak of settling wood. The mansion itself seemed to watch him, its windows like eyes, its shadows shifting as he passed. He would spend hours lost in the faces of the photographs, trying to piece together their stories, their lives. Each image was a frozen moment, a silent witness to a forgotten era. Mac found himself inventing histories for the people in the photos, imagining their laughter, their sorrows, the secrets they might have carried. The more he stared, the more he felt as though the faces were staring back, their eyes following him as he moved about the room. Sometimes he'd whisper their names, reading faded inscriptions on the backs of the photos, hoping for some kind of connection. But something about the photos was changing, something subtle yet deeply unsettling. He'd catch glimpses of movement in the periphery of his vision, a slight shift in a subject's gaze, or a subtle change in expression. At first he thought it was just his imagination, a trick of the flickering light or the strain of staring too long. But the more he looked, the more certain he became that the faces were not as static as they should be. Sometimes a smile would seem to fade, or a pair of eyes would suddenly look away, only to return to their original pose when he blinked. At first he dismissed it as tricks of the light or his own tired mind playing games, but the changes became more frequent, more pronounced. The room would feel colder, the shadows deeper, and the sense of being watched grew stronger with every visit. He began to dread the moments when he'd catch a face mid-shift, the features blurring and reforming in ways that defied logic. Sleep became elusive, haunted by dreams of shifting faces and echoing footsteps in endless corridors. The faces in the photos were slowly morphing, their features becoming strangely familiar. He picked up the photo of the young woman with the piercing blue eyes. Her gaze seemed to pierce right through him, and as he stared, he noticed her features begin to change. The transformation was slow, almost imperceptible, but undeniably real. The arch of her brow, the set of her jaw, details he knew intimately yet couldn't place at first. Her face, once so distinct, now held a haunting resemblance to his own. The curve of her lips, the shape of her eyes, even the faint freckle beneath her left eye, mirrored his own reflection. He reached up to touch his face, half expecting to feel the cool, glossy surface of the photograph instead of his own skin. The boundary between his identity and the faces in the archive was blurring, and he felt a chill run down his spine. It was as if the archive was absorbing him, rewriting its history to include him among its silent inhabitants. A cold dread washed over him. He moved from photo to photo, his heart pounding in his chest. Each new image seemed to echo his own features more clearly, as if the archive was slowly erasing the past and replacing it with his likeness. His hand shook as he shuffled through the portraits, desperate to find one that hadn't changed, one that still belonged to someone else. But the harder he looked, the more his own face stared back at him from every frame. The changes were subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but there was no mistaking it. The faces were becoming his. The archive, once a place of curiosity and wonder, had become a hall of mirrors, each photograph a reflection of his own haunted expression. Mac realized with growing terror that he was losing himself to the shifting faces, becoming just another story, another secret, trapped forever within the mansion's walls. The silence of the mansion, once a comfort, now pressed down on Mac, heavy and suffocating. It was no longer an empty silence, but a silence filled with whispers, whispers that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. He would hear his name, called out from the shadows, spoken in voices he didn't recognize. He tried to ignore the whispers, to convince himself they were just figments of his imagination, but they persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. They haunted his waking hours, followed him into his dreams. The voices were nameless, faceless, yet they filled him with a sense of dread he couldn't shake. He wandered the halls of the mansion, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. The furniture seemed to watch him, the portraits on the walls seeming to follow his every move with their eyes. He felt a presence lurking at the edge of his perception, something unseen yet undeniably there. He sought refuge in the archive, hoping to find solace in the familiar faces of the photographs. But even here the whispers followed him, weaving themselves into the fabric of the silence.